Guys, holy crap, this season of Invincible has been so good. I'm going to drop some heavy spoilers throughout this whole video, so here is your spoiler warning. Season 3 of Invincible is some of the best superhero TV I've ever seen. Maybe some of the best TV I've ever seen. Invincible has done a great job at hooking its audience from the very first episode of the show, but this series has put me in an irreversible chokehold. After season 1, I went and read the comic up to just about where we were in the show, which was only issue 13. But I became antsy. After about 2 weeks, I decided I didn't mind being spoiled for the show. I just wanted more. So I read the whole thing. All 144 issues. Took me a little while because I wanted to stretch it out and enjoy it longer, but I also really don't like endings. I spent so much time with these characters, and to reach the cover that said The End of All Things Part 1 of 12, I couldn't bring myself to finish it. But when I did, I was literally moved to tears. The writing, the art, the coloring, this whole thing is so good. Between this and my last video, maybe I am way too invested into this stuff. But this still wasn't enough. Season 2 had finally been announced, so I remained patient. That was pretty good, but I still wanted more. Then one day, as I was scrolling through TikTok, I came across the Invincible podcast, talking to the man himself, Robert Kirkman, about the finale of Season 2. So, of course, I go to check out the podcast and watch the whole thing. But seriously, if you're a fan of Invincible, you should definitely check out this podcast. To make a long story short, I'm obsessed. I began a collection, I've ingested so much media related to this franchise, and I'm still craving more. Season 3 has adapted some of my favorite parts of the entire comic, with Powerplex, the Invincible War, and Conquest all back to back. Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Conquest? I was so certain he'd be Thrag. But surely if you've made it 3 seasons into the show and have any knowledge of the comic, you'll know that there are a lot of differences between the two. And I am not the first person to point this out, but I would like to take a look at why the show is still so good, having altered so much from the source material. Notoriously, Invincible didn't get the hook that set him apart from most other superhero comics until issue 7, when Omni-Man kills the Guardians. Rather than dragging out the standard superhero show trope, they slapped this twist at the end of the first episode to grab new viewers with its gory subversion of character archetypes. For context, Invincible issue 1 came out on January 22nd, 2003, and issue 7 came out on December 31st, 2003. That's almost an entire year where people picked up Invincible and it was just the same as any other superhero comic book on the shelf at the time. Could you imagine if they did that in the show? Surely it wouldn't have reached the same amount of popularity as it has. In shifting the Omni-Man twist to be so much earlier, they completely altered the timeline of the show. The Mars mission that Mark goes on in episode 4 doesn't happen until issue 19 of the comic. The following issue is when Titan asks Mark to help him take down Machine Head, which does follow the Mars mission in the show, being the episode after, but in the comic, both of these events happen after the introduction of Angstrom Levy and Mark's Atlantis antics that kick off the second season. However, when watching the show, these events don't feel out of place at all. The natural progression of the story doesn't feel stunted by the inclusion of these events earlier. If anything, it's helped. Cecil sends Mark to Mars because Nolan won't go, building tension between the two and showing Mark's naivety at this point in the story. Nolan also preaches to Mark to keep his priorities in check when Titan requests Invincible's assistance. Mark goes against his father's orders and helps Titan anyway because he feels like it's the right thing to do. This expertly sets up the twist when Nolan reveals his true intentions and Mark defies his father because he believes it's the right thing to do. You could argue their inclusions at this point in the story actually flow better than they do in the comic. Some story beats are completely dropped from the comic. In the series, Mark's best friend William is openly gay from the start, and he is so much better for it. William doesn't come out until issue 80, which is well past the halfway point through the series. Early on, right after the Omni-Man fight, William and Eve get together. And it kind of makes sense for this point of the story where Eve is jealous of Mark and Amber and wants to make Mark jealous, but it feels so wrong for both of these characters. Thankfully, this doesn't last very long. In the show, William's open sexuality allows for a moment that's more personal in the show than in the comics. This happens when Mark and William visit Upstate University in issue 6, where they have a run-in with a Reaniman. Reaniman? That doesn't do much aside from scream and kill itself. The The show adds more to this encounter by combining with the other reanimate encounter that happens throughout issues 20, 22, 36, and 37. So much happens between the start and finish of the reanimate arc that occurs in a single episode. Rick gets kidnapped in issue 22. Mark then encounters Angstrom and fights him. He goes to Thraxia, sees his dad again, and brings back his little brother before they even look for Rick. The only reason they even go looking for Rick is because for months William keeps telling Mark they need to look for him, but Mark seems to always have something more important to do. Poor guy. Show Rick only had to deal with the pain for what seems to be a day or maybe a couple days, not months. But this event has so much more weight into it because in the show, Rick and William are already romantically involved by this point. William is trying to save his love interest as opposed to a friend whom he just seems kind of worried about and doesn't really make a real effort to help. William's sexuality isn't the only change that a character receives when being adapted, however. Many of the original Guardians of the Globe have substantial differences. Green Ghost was switched to a woman, Red Rush and War Woman had their designs completely changed, and Martian Man is a completely different Martian. Doc Seismic and Machine Head both have a notable redesign, but we could sit and talk about designs all day. What about proper character change? The most obvious examples of this are Shrinking Ray and Amber. Let's get Amber out of the way first because the internet has already torn this one apart. Amber in the comic is a blonde white girl, but the show portrays her as a woman of color. These are completely different characters, but in a good way. Comic Amber is very oblivious and naive. There isn't much for her to do in the story. She gives Mark her number at one point and then they're just instantly dating. She shows up a few times between big events with just enough time for Mark to blow her off before she's not seen again for a while. She just doesn't matter. She becomes a little more important once he reveals his identity to her, but then he's always zipping off to do superhero stuff. She ends up meeting another guy named Gary.
Me and all my homies hate Gary.
Who ends up being there when Mark isn't. They both mutually decide it's best for them to go their separate ways. And as she pursues Gary,
me and all my homies hate Gary.
Mark pursues Eve. Show Amber has gotten a lot of hate for doing almost the same thing though. In my opinion, Amber is so much more fleshed out in the show. She's a main character throughout the first 2 seasons, and she has her own goals and motivations. What makes her such a hateable character, however, is her reaction to finding out Mark's identity. She reveals that she knew the whole time, and is mad at him for not having told her or making time for her. There's a really thin line to walk, as I can see her point of feeling invalidated and alone, but if she knew he was a superhero, she should have understood that he has responsibilities that would take him away. That just comes with the territory. She becomes less combative with Mark's alter ego in the second season, trying to make it work the best they can, but after being threatened by Anissa, they decide she doesn't belong in Mark's world of superheroes. Both are reasonable causes for a breakup, but I feel like Show Amber put in a lot more effort to try to understand Mark and to be there for him, only to have her life threatened just for being near him. Though the discourse of her online may make you think otherwise, her change in the show is an improvement. The same can be said for the other big change in the show, Shrinking Ray. Ray is a dude in the comic. He shows up in a Fantastic Four knockoff uniform and does nothing but die. He's mainly there to fill the roster. He appears in 13 different issues, and these are the only times I can even find him talking in the entire series. If I missed any, let me know in the comments. But Ray in the show is amazing. Now, she similarly didn't have much to do aside from fill the roster in Season 1, and does meet a similar fate to her comic counterpart in Season 2, but Ray is built different. She survives, but doesn't wake up until Season 3. This whole season with her has been such a treat, building her character and her relationships with the people around her. I was not expecting the love story with Rex, but it was beautiful and made his sacrifice in the Invincible War that much harder to watch. We learn her parents made her go through the whole 9 yards with her powers as soon as they found out she had them. She never dealt with big-name supervillains until she joined the Guardians, which she was sure wouldn't happen anyway. Ray is a fish out of water, and after her run-in with the Lizard League, she knows it and wants out. Even though it took her 3 seasons to get there, Ray has graduated from a background character to a fan favorite. And this is one of the biggest differences between the mediums: pacing. but this stems from the release window. While the show may take a year or a few years to make a new season, you typically get them all within a few weeks. Typically. Whereas comics, when not delayed, come out monthly. Kirkman would set up plot points like this as a way to hook the reader to keep coming back. Oh, there's the monster from issue 6. Oh no, they kidnapped Rick. Oh yeah, what's going on with the Reanimen? Oh, they finally saved Rick. They still do this to a degree in the show, but a lot of these plot points are resolved by the end of an episode or season. Similarly to the Reanimen, the Flaxen invasions happen a few different times in the comic, but are reduced to a single episode in the show, with their last attempt being stopped by Omni-Man, putting them out of commission for the rest of the series up to this point. There are a few different times that the show will take an event that's been spread out and condense it into a single episode. Angstrom is introduced in issue 16, where he is recruiting the Maulers to build his machine, but isn't seen again until issue 21, where the machine is being completed. Then issue 24 has Invincible interfering and causing the accident that creates a villain out of him. All of this was compiled into the season 2 opener, setting up Angstrom as the main villain for the season. He appears a few times throughout, showing his progress toward taking his revenge, as opposed to the comic where he doesn't appear again until issue 32 to torment Debbie and Oliver. This works so well in the show because of the way the seasons are set up. A comic is continuous and will just keep going. They're organized by arcs, different events that hold a significant amount of weight. The show is set up by seasons and in turn is not continuous. They need specific starts and ends to seasons, episodes, and even down to scenes that need a single overarching story that span over the set time to tell their portion of the story. Laying out these portions should be easy though. The show has an advantage, that being the entire comic series to adapt from. The comic had released its final issue 4 years before the first episode of the show even aired. It also started almost 20 years before that. Not only has the entire genre of superhero media changed since then, but so has Robert Kirkman's writing style. On top of now having the input of an entire team of writers, producers, animators, and anyone else creating the show, Kirkman's story also needs to be updated to reflect the modern landscape of the art form. Many comments and jokes that may have been seen as harmless on release that don't work anymore. Multiple times throughout the comic, William asks to be taken flying, to which both Mark and Eve comment that it's so gay. Similarly, when Mark catches him trying to wear the Invincible costume, his only response is gay. These could be tongue-in-cheek nods to the fact that William does come out as gay later in the comic, but ultimately that's just how people their age talked at that time. Something that seemed like normal lingo then could be seen as hurtful now, and didn't make its way into the show. The other big one is Mark's comment about Octoboss's dialect. Come on, Mark, you're better than that. Now that it's complete and they know where characters end up, they have more time to flesh out stories that may have not been a thought when they were originally introduced. Nolan doesn't show much sign of apprehension or remorse for attempting to conquer the planet in the comic. The only signs he shows are his attempts to get ready to talk to Mark and his tears as he flies away after beating Mark to near death. Throughout the first season, you can see Nolan having an internal conflict as he attempts to convince himself that his Viltrumite heritage is right. Honestly, rewatching it after you know the twist, it's sad watching him throw away everything that he's built and struggling to power through the emotional torment. Titan is another character that got updated for the better in the show, having the ability to flesh him out more. In the comic, he's ultimately just a goon who uses Invincible to overthrow his boss. In the show, he does the same, but they add on a daughter and a family he's trying to protect, a city he's trying to bring back to its prime. He paints a roof instead of destroying a building to get Invincible's attention. Small changes like this add so much more to the character, gives him more life, something to latch onto for the viewer. A small character who with a little more time to develop became another fan favorite. So, is the show better than the comic? No. Though they tell roughly the same story, they are entirely different animals. That's the gift of having both. The show does many things better, but there are also so many jokes, character moments, references, and more that you'll miss if you don't read the comic. And that's not even mentioning the amazing artwork done by Cory Walker and Ryan Ottley. I mean, look at this. Just look at this. I love the show, but they couldn't hold a torch to Ottley's work. but they don't need to. That's what the comic's for. So go and enjoy both, because there is never too much. Thank you so much for watching. I've been working on this video for a minute. I am kind of obsessed with Invincible right now, so it's kind of a pleasure. I have 4 shirts now, 2 more on the way from this newest season. I got all these pops. I got these collectibles. Oh man, and my phone case I just got from Redbubble. I love Invincible so much. But for anyone who's new here, I appreciate all the support. This MCU video just blew up out of nowhere, so that's pretty awesome. I'm trying to do more of these throughout, so look forward to that. I also, my buddy and I, Derek, just recently started a podcast. If you guys are interested in more nerd stuff, this following episode is supposed to be all about season 3 of Invincible, and I'm currently challenging him to read the comic. So there's a lot more Invincible content over there if you guys want to check that out. It's called the Variety Voiceover. I'll have a link to it in the description. But until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.